Hello there guys, what is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again for another rational perspective. The morning after the night before, I was working the game quite late last night. Maybe a little bit more positive to kind of have, the evening to slightly forget about Chelsea or just sort of collect my thoughts. They haven't radically changed since last night. Obviously, the result, Southampton 2, Chelsea 1. Chelsea losing their second game so far this season. 2 successive away defeats. A really poor performance. A concerning evening once again. For similar reasons, that my general feeling about this is I think we want to sometimes come to very simple conclusions about football because it's easier. It's easier to say it's about one player, it's about one coach, it's about one thing. The problem at the moment for Thomas Tuchel is there are a lot of problems and it's hard to know where to start, and it's hard to know which one is the most pressing to fix. My preference has always been looking from an attacking point of view, but looking at how vulnerable the defence has looked so far this season, how again from injury and availability, but also old problems that we've had even pre-Tuchel in central midfield. These are all things that, despite some mad spending in the final 48 hours of the transfer window, I don't think can be radically altered just by the flick of a switch, basically. I don't feel that. And the disjointed nature of performances, the lack of cohesion, the lack of a response when things go against Chelsea, which, twice this season I think we've had performances that have showed something that you can be encouraged by. The Spurs game and the Leicester game for different reasons. The following game, all of that kind of goes away, and there is very much 2015-16 vibes, if I dare say it, because I think this is the first time since that season we've lost 2 of our opening 5 games. Or at least I think it's close to it. I remember we lost half of our opening 4 games under Jose Mourinho, that awful start to the season. And Tuchel, it's one thing when you can look at individual errors, which are absolutely still there and have been a big problem. But when I see a majority of players underperforming in a game, and I also look at the team having such a lack of an idea on the ball, particularly after the interval, basically, where Tuchel has 15 minutes to try and solve things and get Chelsea inspired, re-engaged. It's a concern, and there are, as I say, there are many different ways you can go in this. I think that people will look in a certain direction and sort of pin all the blame on that part. But the sad thing is, at the moment, I don't feel that it's just one thing. I think it's a culmination of problems at the moment. That it was interesting listening to Frank Lampard. He was on the High Performance podcast, and he was asked by Jake Humphrey about the final weeks at Chelsea and how, as an inexperienced coach, he said his big problem at Chelsea in January 2021, December 2020, when it all started to go really wrong, was he was trying to solve a million problems at once, and he kind of regrets or would do it differently, kind of focusing on one thing rather than trying to solve complex problems. And it's the problem that a lot of coaches face, and particularly at Chelsea in recent years, there are things in recent weeks and performances like that last night that do feel very familiar. But we are in a new era, and we are under new ownership. Tuchel is being backed. I'm going to be making videos about the transfer stuff, and that is a sign that the club and the new ownership is backing his vision. But he needs to vindicate that trust by progression on the pitch, which we are not seeing. We are seeing regression in defence, midfield, and the attack, with the exception of one new player who is starting to score, which is great, looks very concerning. And it's a problem that Tuchel has had since he arrived, and there are big question marks over how he is going to solve it. Let's look at the team. So Tuchel again is going for a 4-man defence, which is something a lot of us, I'm not going to sit here and try and act like I wasn't calling for it. But, these last couple of games have kind of proved why there are still flaws and risks to changing to a 4 at the back, particularly in central midfield. But Mendy in goal, Azpilicueta, Thiago, Koulibaly, of course, back in the team, Marc Cucurella. Trevor Chalobah, of course, was out. He got a knock, which is a real shame because of how well we played on the weekend against Leicester. Jorginho and Ruben Loftus-Cheek, Mason Mount and Hakim Ziyech, Kai Havertz and Raheem Sterling. So no Reece James, which we found out earlier in the day, apparently for illness, or it's just a precaution at the moment. No Chalobah, no Kante, no Gallagher. The shame of it is, I think that there was a lot to like about the opening 25 minutes from Chelsea. I think we were playing the ball in a more direct fashion. Some of the connections between the front players and the crisp passing directly, particularly Mason Mount, because Mason was in a position where he's kind of at his best as kind of that number 10 in between the lines from a sanctuary. He picks up pockets of space. There was Sterling should have scored earlier, to be honest. There was a lovely move, Jorginho, first time ball or second time, it was into the feet of Mason Mount, and with a first time ball, the weight of pass from Mason Mount, it's one of those things. Mount hasn't started the season well, but it's one of those things where you see him at his best, where he is such a nightmare for opposing defences to kind of deal with, because his movement is so intelligent, where he picks up the ball and the spaces he finds. It was what won us the Champions League, right? It's him finding that space consistently, and the weight of pass into Raheem Sterling was brilliant, and it was of little surprise that he was involved in the goal. Again, a really good run into the box, and having the being unselfish there to put it across the goal for Raheem Sterling. Took his time, put it in. 3 goals in 2 games for Raheem Sterling. That is kind of the only positive from last night, unfortunately. He is starting to score goals, but it's kind of going to be forgotten about because of the defeat. But he could have scored a couple more in that opening half an hour. But it's big to see Raheem scoring, right? That's something that we paid for. We paid for the goals, and to see him already on 3 goals, let's hope that continues, and being in the box, having that anticipation, having the finish, it's what we bought him to do. And he's showing once again why he has been one of the Premier League's best attackers over most of the last decade. But then after that, I think it was a combination of Southampton gaining a bit more bravery on the ball and looking at Chelsea's weaknesses and going for them over and over again. Our inability within the first 5 minutes after taking the lead to keep possession was just shocking. I think both Jorginho and Ruben Loftus-Cheek were just gifting the ball back to Southampton in our own half. Cesar Azpilicueta makes a mistake, gives a sloppy corner away, then he is unable to clear the ball from a corner right into the path of Lavia, who has had a really good start to the season for Southampton. I think he's from Man City, a youngster, looks like a great talent, he really does, and caused Chelsea tons of problems, and struck the ball so sweetly. I know some people were having a go at Edouard Mendy, and I know nowadays, every sort of goal gets, especially Mendy's under the microscope now from the mistake he made against Leeds. I think with the bodies in front of him and the way Lavia struck that ball into the corner too, it would have been a bit of a ridiculous save. I think it was struck so well. I think the mistake there, once again, a set piece. Chelsea at set pieces, it's a big problem already this season. We could have conceded another goal in the second half. We are not marking properly at set pieces. Harry Kane had a free header to score the equaliser against Spurs. Obviously we conceded from the free kick to, I think it was Rodrigo against Leeds. It's a continuing problem, and it was a problem before Tuchel arrived, and he needs to resolve it quickly, because it's just so cheap. It's such a cheap goal, and it changes the momentum of the game completely. And Southampton then started to realise where Chelsea's weaknesses were in central midfield. Jorginho had a really poor evening, particularly when he was asked to defend in large spaces, which I'm not going to blame him, because we know all of this at this point. I mean, this is the sad thing about central midfield. I could have been having the same sort of reaction in 2020, in 2021. Tuchel, there was a reason why Tuchel went to the formation he did when he arrived at Chelsea, because it hid a lot of the flaws within Jorginho's game. His lack of mobility in this league, his lack of physicality. And it's kind of bizarre the amount of money Chelsea are spending, and we're not investing really anything in central midfield. And despite, I understand waiting for the first choice target, but it kind of still works me the way we just kind of passed on Aurelien and Tchouaméni last season, and seeing how he's developed. And also the idea there isn't anyone else, even in our own squad. I mean, I look at Ethan Ampadu, even Billy Gilmore. I know people look at his stature, but the idea that there's no one out there that Chelsea could have invested in that would have been a shrewd investment this summer or last summer is kind of baffling to me. And it's baffling that it is one area of the pitch that I just think is so defining that you just cannot get away with. And unfortunately for Tuchel, with that second goal, the way Jorginho was just easily skipped past, you cannot have that at this level. It's bad. It's really bad seeing a player at a club like Chelsea in a key area in central midfield be skipped past like that. And no matter how much people, I think, have rightly defended Jorginho at times, you know, he'll always have the Champions League, he'll always have, you know, the great 2021. But these flaws in his game have always been a problem, and they are a big problem when a coach at Chelsea with him in midfield wants to progress us into kind of a more dynamic, progressive, risk-taking team. Maybe that was evidence of Tuchel saying, this is why I don't play a progressive system, and to kind of protect Jorginho earlier in his reign obviously had its benefits, but there was also a cost in attack, and that balance is still way off for Chelsea. And I also felt just another kind of tiresome point, Cesar Azpilicueta. He was really nullified and isolated, and again, you have to factor in Chelsea have got injury problems, and Azpilicueta, I think it was kind of obvious at the back end of last season that his time at Chelsea was up. He cannot cope with the physicality and the speed of the game. He was brilliant on Saturday because in that second half against Leeds, he was playing as a right centre back, and Chelsea were in their own half. Never going to doubt Dave in that situation because he's been doing it for most of his career. In a 4-2-2-2 system, when Tuchel needs that right back to be overlapping, creating overloads out wide, needs to be energetic, dynamic, pacey, you know, all those things. Azpilicueta is not at this point in his career. And the way Armstrong, who I thought had a really good game actually against Man United, the way sort of Southampton then just capitalised on that area. And it was a little surprised that the winning goal comes from Jorginho being skipped past, our lack of mobility in central midfield, and then it gets switched to right, and then the ball gets played in and Armstrong finishes it. Just really, really poor. And our lack of ideas of how to respond after that was really concerning. Another positive of the evening, of a very few, was Amanda Breuer coming on. I think Mando looks good. I think he looks inspired. And I think that the guy he replaced shouldn't be playing on Saturday. And I think I've said this enough times now. It's really concerning with Havertz, because he probably is. We're getting to a point now where he probably is going to have to change positions. Some people have respect, like Ollie Glanville has brought this up, and others too. But I also think there is a responsibility on the player to show more, and I'm not seeing it from Havertz. He is drifting through games. He is offside when he shouldn't be for a player of his speed. And I don't think it's an unfair thing to say if Kai Havertz was not a Champions League winner and he didn't cost the amount he did and he was a player coming back from loan, I don't think he'd be anywhere near this Chelsea team based on his own performances. I don't think, and that's for a few players to be honest in this. I could go for a lot of performances last night and say similar, and that's a problem for Tuchel, right? And that's where people are going to start asking questions, because the lack of a meritocracy, it seems, the trust, Azpilicueta, of course, to Tuchel maybe was one of the only options last night in that area of Reece out, but there were points last season when he had other options and he kept on playing Azpilicueta, who kept on making mistakes. And that's where, for me, I start to question Tuchel and his judgment and the way this squad is being built and how is it going to progress, and sort of the unrelenting trust in experience when that experience costs you. These are things that as I say, some of these problems are old, some of these problems are new. Some of them are, you have to lay at the door at the coach because it's his job to make Chelsea better. And that the thing that he was doing so well in the opening months of his time at Chelsea was improving the performances of players overall. Players that we'd kind of doubted and thought could never make it at Chelsea. We're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing actually the opposite of that. A lot of players aren't performing well. A majority of them look either out of place, they look out of sorts. And when it's one or two players making individual errors or looking poor, you can kind of excuse that. When a majority of players are underperforming, it's more systemic, I think. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic in saying that. So, we can go through maybe some of the subs. We can go through what happened tactically in the second half, but there does seem to be a mood and tense feeling around Stamford Bridge at the moment that I felt very much when I watched the team in Orlando against Arsenal. There was a lot about that second half that reminded me, and that game, and just the same as Leeds, that reminded me of the way we played in Orlando in a pre-season game when I was very concerned by what I saw because we didn't look ready for the season. And despite we've had some nice moments since, we still don't look ready for this season. And I don't think that transfers are going to be the easiest thing. Some of it, I think, is maybe Tuchel taking a few more risks in his selection. I absolutely think unless he gets someone in, or unless he, in central midfield, unless you have someone dynamic who can cover a lot of ground, or he maybe put someone there, changes a position, or gets Kante fit enough for a majority of the season, I really do think he's just going to revert back to what he did at the start of his Chelsea reign. I think we will see a 3-4-2-1 on Saturday. I think it will be very much going back to what he tried to instill at the start of his Chelsea reign, which isn't going to be that entertaining. But at the moment, it kind of is at a point where he can't afford to lose many more games because we're getting into bad territory here. We're getting, as Chelsea fans, listen, but we all know the mood of this, and that's what Bowley, I'm sure, is trying to kind of move away from. He is being backed massively in the transfer window, but his performances at the base level as well are just not enjoyable to watch. It's not fun watching Chelsea. Even when we win games, I'm not enthralled by what I'm seeing. I don't see a team who have ideas of how they're going to break down teams in a variety of situations. I don't see a team inspired. I look across the Premier League, I look across Europe, and I see teams that are just more inspiring. And with the talent I know we clearly have on the pitch, I don't think that's very acceptable. I think Tuchel is an elite coach. He has proved some great things at Chelsea. He has made players that I doubted look very good. There is a balancing act here between him transitioning from one squad to another, and that can't happen overnight. But I also do think that it is not ridiculous to criticise a coach and question some of his decision making, even if he has done good things in at times challenging circumstances at Chelsea. There's no denying that. It's a little bit of a longer review. We've got more videos coming with the transfer window ending. I hope I didn't ramble for too long. As I say, there are just concerns, and I don't think that I think we're being in denial if we turn around and just, as some do, and just put their fingers in their ears and just think that it's all someone else's fault and it's just bad luck. I don't, maybe that gives you comfort, but I don't think that's the problem at the moment. There needs to be, as an elite coach, if Tuchel is an elite coach, which I think he has proven enough at Chelsea that he is, there needs to be more evidence of progression at a base level. And some of that is maybe, as I say, rotating the team, giving opportunities to players that maybe are a little bit more raw, but maybe give him a little bit more of what he wants. We will see. Thank you guys for watching. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.